Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. The big story tonight is the crisis in Pakistan. Is Nawaz Sharif losing his grip on power? Is Pakistan hurtling towards anarchy or worse, another military coup? Those are the big questions we shall tackle in part 2. But first, is the Congress party justified in claiming it's not being treated fairly by the BJP? Does the decision about the leader of the opposition and the Haryana Chief Minister's anger with the Prime Minister suggest this is the case? That's the first discussion tonight. And now joining me to discuss the Congress party's claim it's not being treated properly by Mr. Modi and the BJP is Congress spokesperson and Haryana Minister Randeep Singh Surjewala, BJP spokesperson Sambit Patra, and two of India's foremost senior journalists and columnists, Aarti Jarat and Neerja Chaudhary. Aarti Jarat, the Speaker has now decided that neither the rules of Parliament nor the tradition of the last 40 years permits her to give the post of Leader of the Opposition to the Congress party. In your eyes, do you believe this is the right decision in conformity with previous practice, or do you think in the wider interest of Indian democracy, she should have used her discretion and given Congress the post?
Well, you know, I thought it wasn't right of the Congress to demand the post. After all, the Congress, when it's been in power, has itself played fast and loose with opposition parties. If you remember in 1984, when Rajiv Gandhi had that huge majority, he did not give TDP leader of opposition status.
And for the same reason, they didn't have the numbers.
For the same reason, that they didn't have the numbers. So actually, I thought the Congress didn't have the right to demand it. But I do feel that Narendra Modi could have risen above these, you know, this sort of petty tit-for-tat things. You did this, so I will do the same thing now that I'm in power. I think he could have risen above it. And in the larger interest of Indian democracy, given Congress the position of Leader of Opposition, particularly since the whole, you know, the status has become quite important now in terms of appointments, key appointments, in terms of, you know, the way parliamentary democracy has unfolded. I mean, this is no longer an era where, you know, one party used to rule and everybody else was just very, very small in parliament. So I think, you know, it would have been wise, and I think that, you know, the BJP government or Modi government would have found the Congress much more amenable to things like helping them out on reforms bills in the Rajya Sabha had they been more magnanimous with the Congress.
So you're saying two very important things. One, there's a moral argument in the wider interest of Indian democracy, and the second is a practical argument. Given that you don't have the numbers, in particular in the Rajya Sabha, you'll make life easier for yourself if you're accommodating to your opponents so that you encourage them to help you. Mr. Patra, let me put in a sense what Congress believes, and it's something Congress has repeatedly said, that the Speaker's decision not to give the Leader of Opposition post to Congress is flavoured, as they put it, by your government. And they say this is one explanation for why Mrs. Mahajan has taken so long to come up with this decision. How do you respond to that argument that your government has flavoured the decision?
No, I believe the Congress does not have the right to ask for something which they have not given it. And I believe, as rightly pointed out by Aarti Jarat just before this question, that in fact umpteen number of times in the history of Indian democracy was a time when Congress could have easily allotted the post of LOP if it were within the ambits of rule. But since it is not in the directions of Speaker, that is the reason the Congress did not give this post of LOP in the previous years, and that is the very reason that the Speaker today quoted that we have followed the rules, we have followed the tradition, and she has followed the legal advice that was ushered to her by the Attorney General of India. So I believe we should not see anything beyond rules, traditions and the legal advice.
So am I right in understanding from your answer that you don't believe the Speaker has discretion as Aarti sort of felt the Speaker might have? You're saying the Speaker is hidebound by the rules and by the convention and practice of the past. There is no discretion for her to act differently. Is that your position?
No, I believe so, because I have gone through the statement of Speaker in totality, and if you would see towards the end of her statement, the Speaker says that if anyone wants to amend this, then a committee can be formed and a second thought can be given as to whether a LOP post can be given to a party which does not meet the quorum.
Okay.
But as of now, she says, quote unquote, she says that I have followed the rules, traditions and legal advice.
Okay.
So I believe she has made it absolutely clear that she is bound by the tradition, the rules and the legal advice.
Let's pick up on the point that we've just heard, Neerja Chaudhary from Sambit Pata, that the Speaker has no discretion. But that doesn't rule out the possibility of the Prime Minister, in the bigger, wider moral interests of Indian democracy, saying to the Lok Sabha, we have a peculiar situation. We may have gone through this in the past, but now, 30 years later, the world has changed. Maybe the Lok Sabha needs to pass legislation to say, regardless of the size of the single largest opposition, it will always have that official position. Should Mr. Modi have taken that initiative? Because it would certainly have won him a lot of praise, and many would have seen that this was in the bigger interest of democracy. So should he have taken that extra step? Or am I asking too much?
I think Mr. Modi or the Speaker herself can take this initiative. She's already pointed to the possibility of setting up a committee, and because there have been two kinds of interpretation, one is the 1977 law, one is the direction of the Speaker, the first Speaker, Mr. Mavlankar, who insisted on 10%, and 1977 said the largest party. And this 1998 law also, so there have been varying interpretations. Given this situation, and remember the court has left it finally to the Speaker, they did not want to get into this. So given this situation, I think
she should have taken the initiative.
she can still take the initiative, because remember we are into...
Because she'll be taking an initiative against her decision, so that's a problem.
But you see, this issue should be sorted out. Should it be 10% quorum of the House? Should it be 10% popular following?
Yeah. But now, we're talking about something that happens in the future. You're saying actually in handling the Congress issue, she should have taken the initiative herself to sort it out.
I think I would go by, because she has gone by, as they say, I think I go with what Aarti says, the Congress, after the Speaker has given a ruling, should not quibble about that decision.
Let me point that out to you, Randeep Singh Surjewala. I'm going to quote to you what your Deputy Leader of Opposition in the Lok Sabha, Captain Amarinder Singh, has said. He says, it's an act of constitutional indiscretion by the Speaker, who has tried to be ultra-loyal towards someone else. Is it right to claim that the Speaker is partisan just because the decision is not in your favour?
Mr. Thapar, there are 3 points in that. I completely agree with what Captain Amarinder Singh has said. Firstly, Speaker seems to have acted at the instance of somebody else other than the stated constitutional position, which is to ensure that the constitutional mechanism of having an opposition is put in place as per established customs and practices.
Can I interrupt you at that point? Can I just interrupt you? You know, I'm interrupting you, forgive me. I'm interrupting you because you call it the stated established constitutional position, but in fact the Attorney General, who interprets the Constitution for the government, gave advice to the contrary. Secondly, many former Secretary Generals of the Lok Sabha, like Subhash Kashyap, have argued on this program to the contrary. So how can you say this is established practice?
Mr. Thapar, in the current constitutional scheme of things that we have, we need to look at it like this. Are you a Democrat? Do you want an institutional mechanism of opposition which ensures that various appointments to high offices like the CVC, like the CBI director and many others are done by taking into account the opposition point of view and are not partisan in nature, which they will be in absence of a leader of opposition? Do you want the constitutional machinery, custom and practice of a notified opposition to stay? And we must not forget, and I pointed out earlier on your channel, that constitution now by judicial precedent also recognizes the concept of pre-poll alliances. And in it, as a pre-poll alliance, also we are the single largest party, and on our own also we are the single
Constitution
largest party.
The Constitution doesn't even recognize parties, leave aside pre-poll alliances. All of those come in under the Representation of People's Act, not the Constitution.
Through judicial precedents.
Judicial precedence is a very interesting term. There's nothing judicial about it. I don't know how that applies in this instance, but I take your point. You're arguing that on the basis of pre-poll alliances, you have a claim to the job. Let me pick up on the first point made by Mr. Surjewala and put it to you. He's saying that there are, since the 90s, several instances where the presence of a leader of the opposition is essential for appointment to critical jobs. Jobs like the CIC, the CVC, the NHRC, the CBI director, even the Secretary General of the Lok Sabha. And without a leader of the opposition, those appointments will either be hamstrung or they'll have to happen on the basis of what's called the absentee clause. If one or two is missing, you can still carry on, which is not desirable. Do you think that this somewhat indirect reason becomes a compelling reason to overturn everything else and appoint a leader of the opposition and give the job to Congress? I mean, do you accept that argument?
Well, I think it's certainly a compelling reason to look at this whole issue of the necessity of having a leader of opposition. I mean, I do think that this, firstly, you know, the ruling of the first speaker, Mr. Mavlankar, is not cast in stone. Every speaker has the discretion to overturn a ruling made by a previous speaker.
Except it's become part of the 1998 Act, where in fact the definition of a party is the having of 55 seats.
But
therefore,
even there,
Congress under that Act doesn't even qualify as a party.
Even that is, you know, subject to interpretation, and that's the whole point. And that is why this issue needs to be sorted out, because when you do have a requisition, a clause that requires you to have the leader of opposition present in discussions on appointments to key positions, you need to sort this issue out. I don't think we can leave it to the whims and fancies of individual speakers or governments.
Samit Patra, let me pick up the bigger moral point. It was made earlier by Aarti Jarat. In a sense, it was also made by Neerja Chaudhary. And that's this. No one would deny that the speaker has acted in accordance with rules and tradition as she sees them. And she has a right to interpret them the way she wants. That's her prerogative. But in the process, by not having a leader of the opposition, she's ended up diminishing Indian democracy. And surely that is a bigger disservice to India. So in that bigger, wider interest of nurturing India's democracy, should she have taken a different decision?
Now, I believe the democracy has not been demeaned in any way. If you remember a few days back when the CVC appointment issue came up, the DOPT came up with the circular that the leader of the the leader with the highest number in opposition can always be in the appointment process. So, in fact, Mr. Kharge is already in the process for the appointment of CVC. In no way the democracy has been demeaned. But my friend says that this was an established norm. But I disagree with Mr. Surjewala when he says that this is an established constitutional norm. Where was this established constitutional norm when Rajiv Gandhi ji was the Prime Minister, when Indira Gandhi ji was the Prime Minister? From 1980 till 1989, India did not have a LOP. So today when you speak in a different voice, I'm not going to buy it.
Okay, and in fact, just for the sake of the audience, I'll point out India also didn't have a leader of the opposition from 1947 when we became independent, right up till 1969 when the first such official appointment happened. But let me put something else to you, Mr. Surjewala. The problem is that Mallikarjun Kharge, your leader in the Lok Sabha, has come up with a very strange response and very different to what you've been saying to me a moment ago. He's told the Indian Express, and I'm quoting him, he's not disappointed. He says, there is no disappointment in my political life. Now, if he's not upset or annoyed, why on earth should other people take up cudgels on his behalf? Because he seems to have accepted this perfectly happily.
Mr. Thapar, I think you have to see Mr. Kharge's statement in a particular context. Personally, for Mr. Kharge, there can't be a disappointment, and we are not hankering for a chair or an office or a car or some secretarial assistance. We are hankering for upholding the constitutional mechanism of having an opposition, which has been focused more and more and brought out by Aarti also on your channel, on account of successive appointments to various high offices that have where opposition leader now plays a very important role. The second thing is, are you a Democrat at heart or not? It seems that neither the Speaker of the Lok Sabha nor the government, who appears to be influencing the decision, is wanting role of opposition parties in those appointments, because they don't want non-partisan appointments to be made.
You're making a very fair point that there is something undemocratic about not giving the official leadership of the opposition to Congress. I accept that. But then will you also accept that there was something very undemocratic when Indira Gandhi in 1980 and Rajiv Gandhi in 1984 did not give the leadership of the opposition to the second largest party because they didn't have the numbers? Because I think it's that argument you're making works for them as well.
Mr. Thapar, it's like this. Constitution and mechanisms have evolved over the years. Now the post of leader of opposition in the parliament carries certain responsibilities that it did not when the first speaker gave that ruling. And much water has flown down the Ganges over last 30-35 years.
Quite right. Evolution is a wonderful thing. The origin of the species leads to the species making better and better decisions with time. I couldn't agree with you more. You are a scientist as well as a opposition leader. Neerja Chaudhary, let me quote to you something that Amarinder Singh, the Congress's deputy leader, has told The Hindu. He says, this decision not to give the post to Congress betrays the insecurity within the government and an obsession not to share constitutional responsibility with anyone. Do you agree with that conclusion?
I think not. I think it's too early to make that kind of a judgment and a conclusion. I would say even more than the LOP status, the more critical thing is whether the leader of the largest party is going to be part of the committee that selects, as Sambit Patra was saying, the CVC. In the judges' appointment recently, the two eminent jurists who are going to be selected by the three-member committee, Prime Minister, the Chief Justice and the leader of the largest.
Absolutely, not leader of the opposition. Leader of the largest party in opposition, which is a different thing. In other words, Congress can be present there without having the official title.
That's precisely what I'm saying.
Not in others.
So for the selection of all these high offices,
it's important.
It is important. That's where the government's commitment to democracy will be seen if it includes the largest party in opposition as part of the committee to select. Well, why can't it do it?
I'll tell you. Because if the Act actually stipulates it has to be the official leader of the opposition, they can't change the Act without going through Parliament to appoint a different person. They have to go through Parliament for that.
Absolutely, it's perfectly possible to do so.
In which case they could have gone through Parliament and simply removed the clause that doesn't let Congress have the job.
If they want to make the point that it is LOP and therefore 55 numbers, that was the point they were making.
Let's move to something that in a sense coincided with this whole LOP problem. It was what happened in Haryana yesterday, where Chief Minister Hooda claims that BJP workers booed and hooted him, and more importantly, no one in the BJP did anything to stop. Is he right to feel aggrieved that he was treated badly, or is he just overdoing it?
Well, Karan, I think what happened at that function yesterday in Haryana was very, very unfortunate. It was an official function, and you had everybody from the governor to the chief minister to the surface transport minister and of course the prime minister inaugurating that stretch of road present at this function. But what the BJP seems to have done is convert an official function into a public rally to kickstart their campaign, the election campaign in Haryana.
So this is impropriety.
Now, I certainly think it is impropriety. I think there are certain conventions which we need to observe. I mean, many conventions should be discarded, but I think we need to draw a very strict line between an official function and a public political rally.
Sambit Patra, let me quote what Mr. Hooda, the Haryana Chief Minister, said. I will not participate in any such function of the Prime Minister in future. Now I put it to you, whatever the rights and wrongs, leave that aside for a moment. If the Chief Minister of a state in a federal system feels he's been slighted, shouldn't the PM address that concern?
No, I believe this is what is called as demeaning the democracy, in the sense when the Chief Minister says that he is not going to share the Prime Minister's dais just because the Prime Minister belongs to the other party. I believe Prime Minister is the nation's Prime Minister. He does not belong to the BJP or the Congress as such. And secondly and most importantly, whom you are calling the Karyakartas or workers of BJP, I would love to call them the Janta of Haryana. And if today, if the people, the public or the Janta of Haryana are hooting away their Chief Minister, it's only because of the fact that the Chief Minister has not worked for them. Even if I speculate that they were Karyakartas of BJP, they would not dare hoot the Chief Minister if the Chief Minister had given them development.
I don't deny the point you're making, but look at what's just happened this evening. Prithviraj Chavan, the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, is now letting it be known that he is not going to attend a prime ministerial function tomorrow connected with the opening up of the metro. This is the sort of ramification that when you allow this sort of personal relationship to get to the point where constitutional authorities can't get on with each other, then again it's India's democracy that's suffering. And since the Prime Minister is the more powerful, the more senior, and the guy who's won the majority, these two are about to lose their positions, would it not be incumbent on him to reach out, reassure, and in a sense comfort them? That's all I'm saying.
Definitely, the Prime Minister was already reassuring Mr. Hooda yesterday when he appealed the crowd not to hoot. I believe the Prime Minister did what best he could do, and that's how he should be doing it. But ironically, the Chief Ministers of Congress ruled states coming out immediately hours after the whole incident and saying that they would not be sharing the dais with the Prime Minister only points to the fact that either there is an inferiority complex or there is something which they had before the election and it is still continuing after the election. I believe democracies do not function in this manner.
Randeep Singh Surjewala, I want to put to you the point made by Sambit Patra because there is in fact a very sizable kernel of truth in it. And the truth is this, that after 10 years in power, your government, and you are a member of that government, is deeply unpopular in Haryana. The loudest cheer was when the Prime Minister promised to eradicate corruption. And the response of the audience when they booed and hooted Chief Minister Hooda may have been unfortunate, but it's a clear reflection of the fact that support for Congress has collapsed. Now, you can't blame BJP for that, can you?
Mr. Thapar, Prime Minister and Bharatiya Janata Party converted an official function into a BJP rally where BJP supporters, unlike what Mr. Patra says, were carrying their flags and banners and hoardings. They were through a calculated design made to oppose the Chief Minister purely with a view to humiliate a sitting Chief Minister. My point is very simple. In a federal structure, a Chief Minister of a state, irrespective of parties and political affiliations, is supposed to attend a function out of the regard of office of the Prime Minister. When office of the Prime Minister and his party itself denigrates the office of the Prime Minister and Chief Minister in this fashion, I think it erodes the very federal structure of our polity. And can I ask one more thing from Mr. Patra? Dr. Manmohan Singh went to many such functions. Mr. Modi went to many such functions with him. Congress workers were there. But we ensured that no such untoward incident ever happened, and neither with any other Chief Minister.
All right.
I think if Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, such an unfortunate thing would not have happened. I think it reflects upon the character and the arrogance of power that BJP has gone to BJP's head.
Neerja Chaudhary, let me put it like this. Do you accept that this was an impropriety, as in a sense Aarti suggested, and Mr. Surjewala is now giving his own opinion on? Do you think it was in fact just an error or a lapse? Is there something here for Congress to genuinely complain about, or are they seeing slights where none exist? Because unfortunately, what's really hurting them is their election defeat.
You know, at one level, I think it's a slight to the people of Haryana and Maharashtra when their elected chief ministers, who may be very unpopular 15 years down the line, 10 years down the line, but till they remain chief ministers, they represent the people of those states. I find it
but you have a right to boo the Chief Minister.
You may have the right to boo this Chief Minister, and I would have expected Mr. Narendra Modi to say very strongly, enough of this, because it was an official function. It was not a party rally.
Tick off the people for booing the Chief Minister.
Absolutely.
Aren't you denying them freedom of expression when you do that?
Well, they booed, and yet he could have said this is the elected Chief Minister till he is there. And this is not a party rally.
But you seem to be suggesting that elected chief ministers can't be booed.
You reverse the situation, Karan. If in Maharashtra, Mr. Prithviraj Chavan had put 5 people there to boo Mr. Narendra Modi, he could have got hold of 5 people, or Mr. Hooda as today. Would we have liked that? He is the elected Prime Minister of India who represents all of us, and it was an official function. You know, this kind of thing will lead to a rupture of the federal spirit. When, you know, after all, Jayalalitha, many chief ministers have not attended the Prime Minister's function, and that's not a very healthy thing.
Let me go back to Sambit Patra for the last word, but I'm going to ask you, Sambit Patra, to keep it short and sharp. As the first Prime Minister with a majority after a lapse of 30 years, would you accept that there is a moral responsibility on Mr. Modi to be A, more aware of, and B, more responsive to opposition sensitivities, and perhaps to go that extra distance just to give them that assurance that they still matter and count, even if they're defeated and their numbers are minuscule? A quick answer.
Karan, let me remind you of one more incident of similar occurrence. I was also a part of the Commonwealth Game audience, and I remember when Suresh Kalmadi and Sheila Dikshit appeared there was a whole audience which was booing at them, shooing at them in fact. And you saw what the political consequence of it was. They lost Delhi and Suresh Kalmadi become oblivious from the political scenario of India. And the most important part that we should remember is those who denigrate the aspirations of people are treated this way in democracy, in a non-violent and in a way which people express their anguish. And I believe what happened yesterday with Mr. Hooda was the anguish expressed not by workers of BJP, but by the people who had voted for Mr. Hooda in the previous election.
Keep it short and sharp, Sambit. We're running out of time.
Trying to work hard.
At the end of the day, you see this not in moral propriety terms, you see it in party political terms. You have a right to do so. I can't deny you that right. My thanks to all four of my guests for joining me.